Namaste and welcome to Dr. Swetha Prakash. She is the first author that we are speaking to in the newly released book Shared Roots, edited by Ratulji. Welcome to Indica, Swetha ji, and it's lovely to speak to you about the chapter that you have written about. And you're an accomplished authoress. You have done your training and published a lot of books. So we are grateful to you for taking your time to speak to us.
Namaste, Aparna ji. I'm really grateful to be part of this Indica anthology. Indica is a pioneer in the field of Indic studies and Indian cultural studies and contemporary understanding of what India means today to the world. So it's a great honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And this anthology is about India and Cambodia. I think it's the first Indica anthology that is looking outside of India. So, what did it mean to you, and what is your connection to Cambodia, and why did you decide to be part of this anthology?
So actually, it's very interesting. But Vijnana Bhairava, the Kashmir Shaivite text, it talks about art as a way of transcendence, and it specifically talks about how art that surprises us or art that uh, takes us to a sense of strangeness or awe of something that is away from what we know has the potential to take us to moksha immediately or instantly. So it's a state of instant moksha. So if we look at the culture that we have and the culture that we are born with, often it is something that is something that's very familiar to us. So it's something that we are that is so close to us that we are not able to recognize instantly the miracle in it, and we're not able to transcend or attain that state of moksha. But the thing is, what Kashmir Shaivism says is that if we look at an art form which is slightly strange or different and yet contains something which is really remarkable, we can transcend easily, and that is what happens when we encounter the art of Cambodia. Because when we encounter the art of Cambodia, when we encounter the culture of Cambodia, which is a Hindu culture, but which is depicted through the eyes and through the hands of Cambodians. So when we see the giant sculptures in temples of Vishnu and Shiva, we recognize them and yet we don't recognize them. And in that moment of strangeness, a transcendence happens, which is perfectly defined in Vijnana Bhairava. So it is that minute of transcendence where the mind is stilled. Because when we, as Indians, when we keep looking at Indian images around us, sometimes our mind is not still. And the goal of yoga is ultimately to yoga iti chittavritti nirodha. So are we able to still our consciousness with the images we are familiar with? Sometimes we are, and often that is the reason we all pursue yoga, and often that is our goal. But the thing is, with if you look at the same Indian culture from Cambodia, that goal is attained so swiftly because we are encountering something which is strange and yet familiar. So that is how I as an Indian connect with the Cambodian culture. I have not been to Cambodia and I studied Cambodian culture. So I actually first examined the ethic of writing a story about a culture that I'm not familiar with. Then I realized that as Indians, we in any case study what is Indian and we study a bit of Western civilization. So why not study other civilizations? Why not study Africa? Why not study Southeast Asia also? There is no harm in studying these civilizations. For example, if we are doing a course MA in philosophy, we would definitely look at all the Western scholars. We'll look at Hume and we will look at all the Western scholars who have contributed to philosophy. So why can't we, in the same way, look at scholars from other parts of the world? So we are limiting ourselves. So there is no harm in studying a culture like Cambodia. And especially since the Khmer language itself has its roots in Sanskrit. Both ancient Cambodia and medieval Cambodia had deep ties with the Indian civilization. And I'm Tamilian and they had deep roots with the ties with the Tamilian civilization. So it was a very interesting process of exploration for me personally.
That's wonderful that you talk about this familiar yet unfamiliar because in a class last week, when speaking about the Bhagavad Gita, a guru said, this balance between Vidya and Avidya. If there's a person who is a scholar, If Arjuna knew everything, then and he would not be receptive to Sri Krishna's message. So there has to be an element of avidya and the seeker in all of us. So the newness of whatever you are exploring probably helps in the writing itself, because there's a freshness to it which is a person who's lived and experienced it fully may not be able to bring to the story. So, going to your story itself, what made you choose a feminine and the feminine energy when you're talking about witchcraft, or when you're talking about dragons, or you're talking like we've heard about the apsaras in the temples in Cambodia, but these are new, relatively different words that are used in connection to characters in our stories. So, could you tell the viewers more about your story?
Sure. Actually, the thing is that I'm exploring the idea of yoga and how we can talk about yoga in a international context. So, with that, I have been for some time exploring the concept of witchcraft, because witchcraft is very similar to yoga, and it is a word which is used in all civilizations. So, for example, I'm currently in UK. So, if I go to a stones, there is a section of non-fiction on witchcraft. Just like in India, you will find a section of non-fiction on yoga. Now, what is yoga? Yoga is transcendence, or it is turning from the human to the post-human. It is awakening your chakras. It is awakening your kundalini. It is, in a sense, going from the possibilities that are inherent in you and opening up those possibilities. And those possibilities are discovery of your own infinite self. Is this very different from the idea of witchcraft, which also talks about using herbs for healing? In India, the word witchcraft was used in the context of the goddess Chinnamastika, one of the Dasama Vidyas. And Dakini and Varnini are her two friends for whom she severs her head and then the blood flows out. So Dakini itself means witchcraft. So Dakini Vidya is the science of witchcraft. And we, of course, use the words Dayan also, but the root word in Sanskrit for witchcraft is Dakini, and it is associated with the goddess Chinnamastika, as well as with generally with Kali worship. You do have Pishashini. So I have a Pishashini in the story. So which whose Pishashini Kali is associated with Pishashinis, and you have if we read, for example, Dhyana shlokas of Kali, we will find that Pishashinis are dancing in the cremation ground. So, cremation ground scene, the Shava scene, which is very core tantric and Agori and tantric basically, that does involve these magical practices. But what is the objective of these magical practices? The object of magic in Tantra is to transcend from the human, and also Tantra itself, if you look at the word, it means Tantra, which means Tan is the body and Tra is that which Tara, or that which takes you across. So the magical practices which take the body across. Now, in fact, I have got a encyclopedia of witchcraft in history of witchcraft, a penguin encyclopedia. So I'm looking at this from all civilizations and cultures. So it's not that this idea is new to India, but in all civilizations and cultures, people have attempted to take their body across and transcend it. And the word that is commonly used is that of the witch. So a person who's looking at a transcendental practice to discover their own self and discover the possibilities of their own existence and their physical being also would be referred to as a witch. So there are two witches there are three witches actually in the story. The first is the witch who's the Pishashini now, the ghost, and she was a witch from Cambodia. And the reason she's a witch is that she's connected to nature, and she feels the wildness and she feels the wilderness. And so she comes with the intention of looking at spiritual practices in India, and she feels that connection with India. And then in the current setting, Lata Parameshwari is a witch who is the narrator of the story. and she mentions that she does jadutana and tantric practices and shava sadhana and things like that. And then you have her mother, who's also a witch, and she comes from a family of witches. And one of the most renowned ancestors of theirs went to Cambodia and calmed a storm. And this Lata Parmeshwari is based on a goddess called Lata Parmeshwari. And in fact, if you hear the Pratyangira Sahasranamam, Pratyangira is a goddess. Again, I allude. She's an Indian goddess. She's a Tamilian goddess. She's Nikumbala Devi of the Ramayana, who Indrajit worships to actually win the war, but Hanuman stops the practice. So she's also in Sri Vidya Upasana, and in Sri Vidya Upasana, she's the only one who can actually take you across, and she's Aprajita Vidya. So in the Pratyangira Sahasranamam, one of the names of the goddess is Lata. So I've used this name Lata Parmeshwari, and Lata Parmeshwari, in my view, is a snake-faced goddess in this story. So I had a backstory to that, and then I didn't mention a lot of that, but Lata was a goddess who's basically snake-faced, and she's like a sister goddess to Pratyangira, and because Pratyangira is a lion-faced goddess, and as a snake-faced goddess, she is obviously the representation of the goddess Kundalini in goddess form. So this Lata Parmeshwari is the deity of the witch who goes to Cambodia, and the ancestor of the narrator of the story. So, and then the mother of the narrator, Amma, is also a witch. So there are three witches basically. So this is the link to witches. Now, dragons actually, I was also thinking about the concept of dragons or the motive of dragons, and I realized that basically humans started with Earth started with dinosaurs. That's how life began on Earth, with dinosaurs. And if you look at the image of a dragon and the image of a dinosaur, it's not very different. A dragon is a mythical beast, whereas a dinosaur was an existing, the first sort of inhabitant of the planet. But I don't doubt that the images of dragons came from the images that people had of dinosaurs and from the prehistoric times. So it was some archetypal memory that's coming down to us as dragons. So they're the first creatures of the earth with power, because they have the power of life, and they are connected with magic. And for me, I didn't want only humans to have magic, because when you're a witch, you talk to birds and you talk to other creatures. But dragons are a living being with magic. So it's about that ecological connection with magic. So that's why the whole dragon motif.
So when you're talking about art, Cambodia's connection to Indian art is considered, the strongest connection is considered to be the Ramayana and their version of it. But I read that, unlike us who associate divinity with it, for them it is more of a sociological story. Is that correct? And if that is the case, can we actually correlate to, because for us it's so strongly association with divine force and an avatar of Vishnu. Whereas, if you take that essence away from the Ramayana, is it still the same?
That's such a lovely and interesting question that you've asked me, because that was something that I also examined, because I've got two cuts of the Ramayana in that book, in that story, and the first cut is the Rimkar cut, which is pure story. So if you look at it, it is just the narrative. It is the Sita Haran scene, and Sita is known as Negain Seda, and she's being abducted by Chrome Reap, who's Ravana. And that particular scene, if you notice, it is story. There is no philosophy. There is just one philosophical understanding, that Chrome Reap is basically an evil king, and Sita, who has taken avatar, has done so to help the world. So it is an avatar for the betterment of the human being and betterment of the society. But in the Indian version, the second version, actually, I'm able to include philosophy. I'm able to include Advaita Vedanta. I'm able to include Yoga Vashishta. I'm able to include the larger aspects of the Ramayana that we associate with it, which is a learning for a human being to understand Indian philosophy, to understand Advaita Vedanta, to understand how to live, to understand how to transcend the self, to understand the nature of consciousness, to understand the nature of energy. So all those different things. Of course, it's very unfair because, in a sense, when a culture travels from one culture to the other, you cannot expect the entirety of the culture to travel. So but the fact remains that if one examines the Cambodian Rimkar, it is a story uh, of a hero and a heroine, a nayak and a naika, with a villain coming in, and with it is like a typical hero's journey. In fact, that's what it is, and it's a narrative. It's a narrative. But the thing is that in India, it is more than a narrative. It is our soul itself. It's the nature of the self. It's the nature of consciousness. It's the nature of existence. It's the nature of thought. It's about yoga. It is the definition of yoga. It is the part of yoga. It is so much to us. And that meaning is infused in the Indian Ramayanas, in the many Ramayanas. And so for me, looking at the Cambodian Ramayana again was very interesting because here I'm looking at a story. I'm looking at a core story where there is good and evil, and Sita is abducted by Ravan, and then it's that core story. It is a story, but for Indians, it is the story plus the philosophical tradition. It is the Advaita tradition. It is the tradition of the self. It is this tradition of consciousness which transforms our own consciousness. So it is not just another story for us. It is our life itself. It is our blood. The blood Chinnamastika severs and transcends it, takes us beyond. So
I think you have actually articulated the very purpose of this anthology, Shweta ji, because, if they take the essence and without the context, like if you take the Gita out of the Mahabharata and say the Gita is the Mahabharata, yes, it contains the core teachings, but we still need the Mahabharata to understand the context of everything in life. So I think your book would be very useful and very your chapter and the rest of the book to people from Cambodia to understand the context of what they have inherited. So, because I'm not sure how much of what you've said as actually being appreciated when these ideas travel. And like you said, we do not know the nature of how ideas travel, whether, a temple was built by an Indian king who goes there and comes back. But what did he leave of the philosophy which guides the agamas, the rituals, the practice, the thousands of years of philosophy, the people who have by through an oral tradition carried that philosophy. So I think the book for sure will give the background that is required for them to understand their own heritage. Don't you think so?
yeah, definitely. But their heritage is it's remarkable for all Indians, and to find an Indian culture in another context and depicted by a different set of people, and it also. I mean, traditionally people say that you have to be born a Hindu, but here is a whole country which is not uh, which was not born a Hindu, which proves that was not correct. It was even traditionally it was not correct that you cannot become a Hindu. So there's so much to examine in this sharing between India
Yeah.
and Cambodia.
So this sharing is often rooted in antiquity in the past.
Mhm.
So if you bring it to today's context, it's largely through art and culture.
Yeah.
Is there also a lifestyle kind of link that we have with Cambodia? Would you be aware of that with all your research that you did?
Actually, I found many sharings between India and Cambodia. The first thing is the ecology itself looked similar to me, and I think that was the root. That was probably the basis of why Cambodians decided to accept Indians, because it was not a colonial kind of an acceptance. It was a genuine acceptance where they wanted this culture and they used this as the basis of their language. They used Sanskrit as the basis of their language. So. So what I found was that the ecology, for example, in India we have elephants, we have big cats, and they have leopards, and they have primates.
Mm,
So they have a gibbon forest,
mm,
and they have a lot of forests. So, and the trees, for example, they have palm trees. So India also is has a lot of palm trees. So just the shared ecology was the first thing that made the culture familiar. These two countries, when contact was made, it did not look so different.
mm,
There was a possibility of sharing that would have happened. That started with ecology itself. Then the second thing which is interesting is that today, if you look at Cambodia and look at India, Cambodia street has street food, and in that street food,
mm,
the fruit, for example, is mango. Again, an example of the shared ecology, and they would cut the mango and put chili and salt on it. Something that is
mm,
not typical in
mm.
Indian streets also.
Right.
And secondly, for example, they have different types of transportation. So most of the world has fairly standard ways of transportation, but in India we have autos, and sometimes in Chennai you have different types of autos also.
Mm,
But Cambodia also has tuk-tuks, which are very similar to autos, and they have different types of transportation. So all this shows that there is this sense of commonality between the cultures. So there's a lot of rice plantations in Cambodia, rice plantations in India. India is also a rice-based culture, especially southern India, which had contact with Cambodia. So when you felt that you were eating the same food, you were looking at the same sort of nature, that you wanted the
mm,
culture also, you wanted to share the culture also. And also they had pepper plantation. Cambodia has pepper plantations. It has cardamom mountain. So spices,
mm,
no, India is known for spices. So there is a sharing. There is definitely a sharing. So when you feel the same ecology, when you see the same plants, then you want to share the culture, and you want to exchange, and it's a very positive exchange. It's an example of a very positive exchange.
mm. I read in your profile, Shweta, that you got a scholarship for a writing retreat, which was in an uninhabited island. What was that all about?
So
That
that
sounds
was
so
when I was studying.
fantastic. That sounds so fantastic.
Thank you. I
Mm,
was quite young at the time. I was 28 or 29, 28, I think. And I was studying, I was doing my MA in writing course at Warwick. And at that time, there was a notice for a grant for if you send a short story. So
mm,
I had been writing a short story at that time, and it was basically looking at the economic model of India and the economic change. So 25 years of how 25 years of in 25 years India had changed, and how what were the social consequences of the IT revolution in India. That was the
mm,
backdrop to a fictional literary fiction narrative.
mm,
And I wanted to write especially with symbols. So I wanted to acknowledge Tamil Sangam poetry, which I had always loved reading, and also the poetry of A.K. Ramanujam and his translation of folk tales. So I wanted to write everything image by image. So I
mm,
sent, so there was a grant or a residency award. And
mm,
so I just sent my short story along with the concept note behind it. And
mm,
suddenly I got a call from Erica Wagner. So Erica
mm,
Wagner is the Times Sunday Times correspondent, and she's a very well known literary figure in the UK. And she interviewed me, and she said, "You won the award," and she was the judge. And so then the face appeared on the Sunday Times, and I was amazed. And I was quite
mm,
young, so and then I went. This was the Scottish book. It was a Scottish Book Trust Times
mm,
and Jura malt whiskey. That particular island is called the Isle of Jura, and it's an
mm,
uninhabited island. There is only one village, and there is
mm,
a distillery in the village, which is the main production activity or the economic activity. And there are a lot of deer,
mm,
so it's a very safe island to also visit. And it's
mm.
almost like Jurassic Park. So it's very strange that it has the same name as it sounds like the
Right.
Jurassic Park. but the ecology there is extremely ancient. It's extremely ancient. The forests are so ancient. You feel that you've gone into the Jurassic Park, Jurassic era. And for people who are trying to shoot films on Jurassic Park, that would be a very good locale.
Right.
My task set out for me was that I had to write a short story set in a Scottish island with Indian characters for
Mm,
the Scottish Book Trust. So they had an anthology that they wanted to bring out,
mm,
and so they and I had to spend a month in the island. It was in a writer's lodge, and George Orwell had written
mm.
1984 in that island. So
Oh my God. Mm,
that's why the Scottish
mm,
Book Trust was connected to that island.
yeah.
And so I had to write also. I also wrote a short note for the blog of the Scottish Book Trust. So I
Mm,
researched the island for that purpose. So what I found was that the first human rights sort of a law, which the church defined that
mm.
humans need to have rights, was written
Mm.
on that island. And
Okay.
George Orwell had come in and written 1984, which is also obviously on human rights.
Mm,
And so those were the two connections. And apart from that, I looked at the motives of the deer, and then so those were the connections with the island. And when I wrote about it, I mentioned the deer in the Ramayana,
mm,
uh, my understanding of the deer, and seeing so many deer around me, it was
mm,
very interesting. And they also have a distillery, so I gave them a motive of the turning of the ocean,
mm.
which is about in a sense distillation of the consciousness, and to get what you so with that I concluded my blog for the Scottish Book Trust. But that was, and then I did a story for them, which I gave in, and it was published in The Spirit of Jura, which was an anthology with other writers. But this
Mm,
particular residency was a one-off residency. I don't think they continued with it. They
mhm,
gave it to some eight famous writers and one new writer, and I won the new writer award.
mm,
So
mm.
that was the one thing.
Yeah, that's such an amazing story and must have been an amazing experience that has probably shaped a lot of what you continue to write about and feel strongly about. Clearly, ecology and these ancient values and bringing in our motives and themes into your writing seems to be a very strong point.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Swetha for this conversation. You're the first among the authors of the anthology, and I wish you all the best in your writings.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so much.
you.